Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meets logic and scientific facts on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex, and today's episode is going to be on how to vote smarter, not harder. Now, this comes about because we are in the time of early voting for this year's elections. Now, this is one of the key election years in which you get to vote for president. So it tends to be the time that really brings out people, a lot of people, to vote and voice their opinion, and to shape the politics that so govern the world around us, so to speak. Now, I came up with this just because there are so many people that I know of that don't really do a whole lot of research, so to speak, when it comes to choosing their candidates and putting forth their ballot into the election. And that kind of bothers me. And so we're going to kind of discuss that today, as well as throw in a few other little topics, and even talk about the Indiana ballot that I just filled out a couple days ago during early voting. So what I'd like to start with is how voting is one of the most important things in this country, one of the most important rights that we have in this country. And just to remind you of the history of that, we briefly talked about it in one of our previous episodes, but it's had a rocky history. We have had to go through this process just trying to get the right to vote through a number of different loops. Okay, we've had to jump through all these hoops and go through all these trials and tribulations just to get the right to vote. All right. So it's very important that once we have that right, that we use it, and we use it wisely, and use it well. And that when we make our decision, we do so in a way that is most conducive to generating a country that aligns with what we feel is important, and what we feel is important for our children, and our children's children, or in my case, my nieces, and any children they may or may not have. Hopefully many decades from now, if they're going to have children. So it's definitely something that's not exactly a small undertaking. All right, it's definitely a delicate process that should require some sort of real thought, logic, and reason behind it. It shouldn't be something that we just reflexively do as a country. You shouldn't reach a point in your life, when you reach voting age, which is 18, you shouldn't just all of a sudden say, well, all right, I'm going to choose to be a Republican from here on out because my parents were Republicans, my grandparents are Republicans, so it only makes sense I'm a Republican. So I'm just going to ride with that. And, I'll just go up there to the ballots, I'll just check the Republican straight ticket and go home. Spend a whopping 10 seconds on that voting ballot. I strongly discourage against that. And the reason why I say that is because there are a number of times where people who are the top representatives of your party may not necessarily have values that align with your own. So you may be voting for somebody that doesn't necessarily agree with some of the points of view that you feel are important. If you feel that women's rights is important, well, you probably don't want to vote for Jim Banks, and we'll talk more about him later. You might want to vote for one of the other party alternatives. Okay. So things like that it definitely play into it, and we'll have a few examples here in a bit. But just to kind of underlie this importance of voting and how really every single vote counts. It really does. And so it makes it all the more important that the votes that are put forth are well-informed votes. Now, I'm going to give an example here. My father actually ran for Noble Township trustee a number of years ago, back when I was in high school, funny enough. So yeah, that would make it, easily at least 13 years ago. And what was incredible about that election was he had never run for public office of anything before. He'd never stepped foot into politics, but he felt compelled to try and put his feet in the water, just to get wet, and see how it felt. I've always been really proud of him. He's always been a jack of all trades, so to speak. He has a little bit of knowledge and experience in a lot of different things, and actually when I say a little bit, I mean he has a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. So I've always been really proud of him for that. So when he had the bravery to go into politics, that was, wow. That was a direction I never saw any member of my family going, much less my dad, who is typically more akin to doing construction type things, saving lives as a paramedic and nurse, and firefighter, actually, or being in the military, and being a security officer in the military. So I pictured him in every other role in the world but politics. So it was really quite a surprise to me. But man, he campaigned. Man, he had a lot of friends and connections in the county because, like I said, he was a firefighter. He was on the EMS. So he got around and he knew a lot of people in town. And so sure enough, he got enough people to rally behind him that, he was able to put out signs in all their yards. And so people would drive by and be like, oh, Rex, okay. I know that guy. Cool, I'll vote for him, whatever. And so this guy comes out of nowhere to oust this lady who had been in the position previously and was, running for re-election, so to speak. I can't even remember her name at the moment, but yeah, this guy comes out of nowhere and manages to get enough of a following that, lo and behold, he ends up winning the election. The margin by which he wins that election ended up being a single vote. A single vote. In the entirety of the voting area, district or whatever, that was voting for Noble Township trustee, he won by one vote. And that was incredible. Absolutely incredible. Surprising that he won. Even more surprising to think that it was a margin of a single vote. So it really emphasizes the importance that, hey, every single vote counts. And what's funny about that is that people afterwards can come up to him and be like, hey, it was my vote that got you into that office. And he'd be like, you know what? You're right. It was your vote. And your vote. And your vote. And your vote. All of your votes really did matter and really did get me into this Noble Township trustee position. So, thank all of you. That is awesome. Democracy works. But, lo and behold, his opponent did the logical thing. I can't blame her too much. And did request a recount or two. And funny enough, it came up with the same count every time. Always at +1 to Rex. So, that was cool. It's very cool. The thing that was not so cool about it was the fact that the lady that my dad was running against was not the most fair person, so to speak. She liked to fight dirty. Okay, and so she tried spreading some rumors, saying some awful things about my dad to try to taint his reputation and swing the election in her favor. Okay, and I really think that's why she only lost by one vote, because I think that her propaganda campaign was relatively strong, and that Dad would have won by a much larger margin had she not undergone that nasty campaign. It was just very unnecessary, so to speak. So, very interesting little tidbit story from my experiences, my father's experiences. And once he got into office, he started realizing how difficult that job was, especially when previous people were kind of borderline incompetent at doing that job. Basically, Dad was handed a stack of papers that was not unlike stacks of papers I've gotten to teach a class. I'll have an administrator of some kind give me materials to teach a class, and they'll just throw down a stack of files and papers and folders and be like, all right, there you go, have at it. When these things look archaic, all right, like they were made in the 90s and have been recycled ever since, with old photocopies and Xerox scans, black and white images that have been photocopied at least 3 times. It's a disaster. Okay, there's no original documents in there. It's all just purely scanned stuff, all old stuff, not really anything new included in there. And there's really no order to that material. No order at all. You have everything mashed together, and you have to try to sift through it and pick out, oh, this is chapter 1, oh, this is chapter 2. Then you have to sit here and try to reconstruct the syllabus and be like, well, okay, what have previous people done? Because at least you get old syllabi. But then you have to try to think about the practicality of it and try to throw it into a modern spin involving all this online material as well. And so you have to sit here and basically generate an entire class using all these different materials, when really it should have been as easy as just handing you everything ready to go. There's nothing difficult about that. But somehow previous teachers and politicians don't understand that that's important. To standardize something, to sit there and perfect it, so to speak, optimize it. That way, when you leave that position, or when some new person comes in, new teacher, new politician, then they get handed this stuff that's already a pile of nicely organized, optimized material so that they can do their job and focus more time on actually doing the job instead of perfecting a process or perfecting the materials in a way that should have already been done. And that was what my dad had to battle with. And so I sat down and helped him. Okay. He basically had all these records, all these requests from various people in the county, and none of it was organized at all. He had to buy filing cabinets, folders. We had to spend umpteen hours, hundreds of hours easily between me, Dad, his wife, and maybe a couple other people, just organizing these files. Just absolutely incredible. Because without having them alphabetized, it's kind of hard to find the right file that you're looking for. You can spend literally hundreds of hours looking for this stuff, and that's just stupid. Why was that even in place? Why was that even a system? How was that functional? It doesn't make any sense. So we sat down, we tried to perfect this system. That way the next person who comes in won't just be thrown into the fire pit with a bunch of dogs, like what we were. Okay. And then we had people griping at us that it was taking griping at Dad because it took him a little while to get his groove going. It's like, okay, hey, number 1, he's brand new in politics. Number 2, he was thrown a huge stack of papers. Okay, I'm talking garbage bags worth of papers. Okay. Completely unorganized. So yeah, it took us a while to organize those, just so he can get to the point where he can start figuring out what to do, how to do it, who he needs to contact, how he needs to contact them, and get the jobs done that are expected of a Noble Township trustee. And honestly, for the money that he got, it was not even remotely worth it. Not even. And that's why he didn't run for re-election. He's like, you know what? I've gotten a taste, and it is sour. Screw this hippie noise, I'm going home. It's essentially what he did. So I don't blame him, I don't blame him for not getting into politics and staying there. Because when you look at some of these people, it's hard to imagine what their job is like. Really hard to imagine what their job is like when you've never done that job before. You have no experience or other knowledge about the inner workings of that job, especially with jobs that contain or have a lot of dealings with confidential information. That's a huge thing. Trying to understand how to secure that kind of information, whether you don't use a private email server or whatever, that takes knowledge and experience. So you have this learning curve that you have to expect when going into a position that you've never been in before. And we see this learning curve with both presidential candidates right now. Whether we're talking about Hillary or Trump, they're both going to have a learning curve when getting into that office. Because I'm sorry, no third party is going to win this election, not even remotely. Okay, they're outgunned 10-1. Not going to happen. They put up a good fight though, I'll give them that. Anyway, when Hillary or Trump gets into office, they're going to have a whole lot of stuff that they need to take in, learn, and adapt to. Either one of them. But the learning curve is not going to be quite so sharp for Hillary as it will be for Trump. Because Hillary has been in politics for a long time. She understands most of the way that most things work. Trump, on the other hand, is going into that position from the standpoint of my dad, basically. Taking over that township trustee position, Dad didn't have a clue about any of this stuff. He took forever just to learn all this stuff. Same thing's going to be the deal with Trump. If he becomes president, nothing much is going to happen in the first few months. As he sits here and tries to learn and adapt and soak in everything, try to figure out what to delegate to Mike Pence and what to deal with himself. It's going to be a steep learning curve for him. But on the other hand, that's why it's good that he's running with Pence, because Pence at least has some experience. So Pence can adequately help Trump in some ways and share the load, divide the burden a little bit of that incredibly important position, which is the President of the United States. All right. Looking back at our election, if we examine where the polls are right now, okay, the projected election polls based on how the polling stations are looking right now, if we look at the way it was at 1 a.m. this morning, all right, and this is November 3rd, 2016, by the way. If we look at where it was there, we see that the lead that Clinton has over Trump is by about 9 points. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was referencing the wrong thing. I'm sorry. At the national scale, Clinton is leading Trump by about 2%, which is not much. The national scale. If we think about here in Indiana, right, Clinton is actually 9 points behind Trump. Okay, Clinton has about 38%, Trump has about 47%. Right, so Trump is leading by a good-sized margin here in Indiana. But at the national scale, he's losing by about 2 percentage points. So, needless to say, things are getting tight as we're nearing election day. And more people are going out and doing this early voting process, which is great. And that's giving us a little sharper idea of how the final polls might end up in the end, by the end of the day. Now, unfortunately, the third-party candidates are not doing so hot. As I kind of alluded to before, Gary Johnson is at about 4%, Jill Stein is at about 2%. So, pretty minimal, not really going to matter. Which is usual. I mean, we've seen this exact same pattern before in past elections, to where third-party candidates really don't matter. I'm sorry. More often than not, they don't matter. Couple of election years, yeah, they have mattered. But more often than not, especially in recent past, hasn't really mattered much. Okay. Now what's interesting is if you look at the third party and their trends over time, you'll see that they've actually been decreasing over the past, I don't know, 2 months. So they were at about twice the level 2 months ago, twice the popularity 2 months ago than they are today. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe people are realizing that's kind of futile, and so they're switching more and more to Trump or Hillary, because both those numbers have been climbing over time. So we see this redistribution here near the end from the third party and into the two-party system that has so dominated the United States. Now, in Colorado, we see a trend that is kind of similar to the national. All right, here in Indiana, we're very polarized, much more behind Trump than we are Hillary. In Colorado, it's very close, very, very close. Represents about the national average. Illinois, however, Illinois is a different story yet. And I guess I didn't write down the exact numbers, but Illinois is ridiculous. Clinton is like 15 or 20 points ahead of Trump in Illinois. Can't imagine what that has to do with. Maybe some of the comments that Trump has made against Illinois, most notably Chicago, referring to the inner city as being a war zone and a very dangerous place to where you can't even walk down it without getting shot. That may have something to do with it. Maybe some people taking it personally and not taking kindly to some of Trump's comments about the place that they live. Could have something to do with it. I don't know. Well, if we were to take a step back for a second and examine voting rights in general. We kind of briefly mentioned it while we were debating the Constitution before, as far as how we got the right to vote, when we got the right to vote, things of that nature. So I'm just going to recap it here real quick. All right. Note that in the original Constitution, not everyone was guaranteed the right to vote. Not by a long shot. Okay. The original Constitution, basically voting was reserved for white men over age 21. That was it. All right. It took successive years, many years, all right, almost 100 years, until voting was all of a sudden not something to do with color or race or whether you were a slave. It was only at that point that we said, hey, we no longer care about those things. You just got to be a man that's 21 or over, and you can vote. So you can be a black man, a Chinese man, whatever. Doesn't matter. Cool. That helped. About 1870, that really helped. But then it took another 50 years until women joined the ranks of the voters. About 1920. Pretty phenomenal. Our country was around for about 150 years without women being able to vote. Kind of sad. Kind of sad. Then we have another strange amendment being passed that we never really think about in modern day times. Those previous two amendments, we understand those. That was Amendment 15 that allowed blacks to vote. Then Amendment 19, which allowed women to vote. Nobody really thinks about Amendment 24, though. Okay, this really seems like kind of a minor thing, but in today's modern age, where people are getting kind of beaten up over their taxes because of certain other surcharges like the Affordable Care Act, we're in a position where a number of people are owing tax. Okay, owing on their taxes and having to undergo a payment plan to where they sit there and pay off those taxes over a period of months throughout the year. Almost like a credit card or a loan or something. So this Amendment 24 came out in 1964 that permitted you to vote if you owed on taxes. Okay, because if we had that still enacted right now, to where, or if we still had the little quirks, so to speak, of the Constitution still prevalent now, well, heck, I would guess that a good chunk of the American population wouldn't be able to vote. Because a good chunk of us end up owing on our taxes and having to pay, at least for some months throughout the year, on those taxes until we finally get them paid off and taken care of. But luckily in 1964 we fixed that. Said, hey, if you owe tax, that's fine. You can still vote. Right? You don't have to pay off your taxes before you can vote. That's kind of stupid. And I agree. That is kind of stupid. Furthermore, we see one last amendment relating to voting rights, so to speak. Amendment 26. That was passed just a few years later in 1971, and that told you that so long as you were 18 and over, then you could vote. So you no longer had to be of drinking age 21. You could be age 18 and over, which is great because that allowed seniors in high school to be able to vote. Whereas before you had to be, either well out in the workforce or well into college before you could vote. A lot of people took issue with that. I took issue with that. Now we're reaching the point where people are nitpicking a little bit more and trying to get that age further lowered because they're sitting here saying, well, but you can join the military when you're like 16 or 17. So why can you go off to die for your country, but you can't vote? And people make the same argument, well, if you can do that, well then why can't you drink alcohol at those ages? So that brings up a whole nother can of worms. Right? And we're trying to still figure out what exactly is fair, what's right, things of that nature. But as far as the 18 and over, I don't know. I think that's kind of nice. I mean, I'm sorry. I think it's more difficult in a much more delicate situation to vote than it is to go into combat. Now that sounds, might be shallow or stupid or short-sighted, but I'm sorry, I think that when you elect a politician that can sit here and dabble in 100 different things over the course of their term per year, I think that has a much bigger, wide-ranging, far-reaching impact than going into combat does. Going into combat, you probably influence the lives of those around you, in your squad, in your unit, your commander, those who are subservient to you, and those that you're fighting against. But it really doesn't reach much beyond that. Generally speaking, it does not reach beyond that. Whereas a politician has their fingers in so many different things. You're basically voting for a network node. Okay, because they are just one node on this huge network that they have their fingers in and have influences in and have connections to. They can influence all these different things simultaneously. That, I think, is much more powerful than any person with a gun going into combat. And that's why we have politicians and why we have combat grunts. Because those two people perform two very different jobs. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily trust a politician with a gun being thrown into combat unless he's had previous combat experience. Because really his job is to be a politician. Right? And same thing vice versa. It's kind of hard to sit here and take a random grunt from a unit and put him into the Senate and expect him to perform at an equitable level. I wouldn't expect that. Because more often than not, they have no knowledge or training in the other field. They are specialized. Politicians are specialized in network. Grunts are specialized to target that person and attack. So two very different job roles and two very different levels of impact when it comes to the overall society and state of being in this country. So I actually kind of agree with the 18 and up to vote, because I think it requires a lot higher level of cognitive ability. It requires a lot of time to sit here and think about all these different types of issues, to have enough life experience to be able to make some judgment calls, some good decisions, and to be able to sit down and know how your politicians are impacting the world around you. You know, your individual town or district, township. It's important to know those things. And typically, it's kind of hard to know that kind of thing when you're so young. So I actually kind of approve of the 18 and up voting law and it remaining there, because I think that's really the earliest that you can start making those sorts of decisions. Now, if we want to talk about a side topic here, lowering the drinking age, I could see lowering the drinking age to about 19. Okay, 19 I think would be a solid age to drop that to. The reason why I say that is because I think it might be problematic to make it legal for seniors in high school to drink while they're busy trying to graduate. I think that would drop graduation rates. Now, granted, seniors in high school drink anyway, so yeah, there's that, but making it legal is an entirely different issue. And I think that once kids get to college and tack on that freshman year, that's when they start getting exposed to all this alcohol on a massive scale, at least more often than not. You know, provided they're on campus around the sororities and fraternities, all these crazy parties going on. I really think it could be advantageous to have a legal drinking age of 19. You know, I believe that can actually free up some police resources to be spent in other areas, enforcing other laws other than underage drinking, because more often than not, kids are just out to have a good time. And so sitting here and spending all this manpower and police hours just looking around for people on college campus, drinking, getting drunk when they're underage, I just think that's a huge waste of time. That we can focus on much more important things with those man hours. But and again, that's just my personal opinion. So don't necessarily take that anything other than that. Anyway, getting back to voting. So it's great now that everyone, all ages, all sexes, all colors, all races, everyone at the age of 18 can vote. That's awesome. Another awesome thing is the ability to vote early in the election. All right. That's really convenient for those of us who tend to always find ourselves really busy on election day. I don't know what it is, but I swear every single election day I am just busy all day, straight through. No opportunities for breaks, nothing. Yeah, especially when considering my job and how I'm an adjunct biology professor. They don't care about me. I don't get a substitute teacher. I don't get to call off my class. I have no power when it comes to that. I have to be in that classroom teaching those kids, period. That is my contract. If I break my contract, I'm gone. It's a pretty two-dimensional equation. Tenured faculty, on the other hand, have certain advantages. Actual faculty, even, not even the tenured ones, have certain advantages. I'm not full-time faculty. Okay? I'm part-time faculty. Part-time faculty has nothing. Okay. Borderline nothing. I do get some perks, but not many. Definitely don't have the ability to call off class or get a substitute for my class. That's the main deal. So, when it comes to election day, not really an option for me. I can't swing it. Can't swing it. So I have to vote early. Otherwise, I'll never vote. And that was kind of my problem earlier this year. Thought I'd be able to swing it on election day. It just didn't happen. So I was unable to vote in the primary election this year. I feel bad about that. That was stupid. But you know what? I made up for it. Because I just voted about a week ago or so. And now I feel like I've accomplished something. I've tried to implement change in some way, at some level of the political system. And I'm happy with that. I think that's cool. Now, when I voted, I voted, like I said, about a week ago. And here in Fort Wayne, you only had one location in the entire city that you could vote. Anywhere from October 12th through the 31st. That was the only location in the entire city that you could vote, at the Russo Center in downtown. Second largest city in the entirety of Indiana, and you have one voting location. How well do you think that worked? I can tell you right now, not so well. One location being run by a skeleton crew of people with only a couple machines. Okay, a few machines. I think there were 6 machines, I want to say. So, skeleton crew of people, I think there were 5 people. 5 people, 6 machines. And they were somehow expected to work for 2 weeks, being the only voting location in all of Allen County. That's insane to me. How does that even work? Who made that call? That's crazy. Not to mention, when you actually get to the location, you realize, wow, that is a giant line that just wraps around the place. And you see a friend in line, you're like, hey, how long have you been here? And they're like, hey, been here an hour. I still got a little ways to go. So sure enough, took me and my wife an hour and a half to make it through that line. Hour and a half to be able to gain the right to vote. Right? That's a lot of time commitment. And some people just didn't have it. I saw a number of people step out of line and leave because they're like, oh my gosh, I have things to do, man. I was just doing this on my way home. But you know what? I've got other crap I need to do tonight. I cannot sit here for 2 hours and wait for this. This is ridiculous. So a lot of angry people. You know, especially frustrating when you consider the fact that the place was not well ventilated. Right? They didn't have their AC turned on. It was broken. And they didn't have even any secondary devices to help improve the airflow. So it was getting really hot and stuffy. When all they needed was like a single turbo fan blowing down the hallway. That was it. All they needed was a door that was propped open with a fan in front of it blowing some nice cold air in. It was getting so stuffy and nasty in there. It's gross. Everybody started sweating and everything. It's like, oh my gosh, dude. This is unpleasant. Resulting in a lot of frustrated voting going on. To where once you get up to the voting machine, which basically looks like a tablet locked in a suitcase, a bulletproof suitcase. Once you get there, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is stupid. I just want to get home, get in my comfy couch, and start doing everything else in life because this stupid process. So you just start pushing buttons, and you're like, all right, next page, next page, next page. Ah, very frustrating. But you know what? I did it. Got it done. Awesome. Awesome, awesome. Feel like I made a difference here. When it came to looking at what was actually on the ballot, there were a couple things I noticed. First off was what we were immediately presented with on the screen, which was a public question. Not entirely sure why they posed it in that manner, but the public question had to do with the right to hunt and fish. Right? And this was an amendment that was being proposed to the Indiana State Constitution. I'm still kind of struggling with government and understanding it myself, but we do have federal level constitution and amendments, and then we do have state level constitution and amendments. Because the federal level governs a lot of things, but there are some things that they really leave the states to decide. And so the states decide those things by via their amendment or via their constitution and any amendments to that constitution that they have. So this was a proposed amendment. It had to do with preserving the right to hunt and fish. That was kind of how it was worded, and let me just go ahead and tell you exactly how it was worded here. All right, the public question was, shall the Constitution of the State of Indiana be amended by adding a Section 39 to Article 1 to provide that the right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife shall be forever preserved for the public good, subject only to the laws prescribed by the General Assembly and rules prescribed by virtue of the authority of the General Assembly to promote wildlife conservation and management and preserve the future of hunting and fishing. That was the public question. Okay, so that was kind of the distilled down version that we were presenting to voters at the actual ballot booth. I had issues with that because I actually heard about this amendment, this proposed amendment beforehand, and was able to research it. And once you start researching it, you start realizing a couple things. Okay, and so if you really start looking at it, you notice that the summary of this particular amendment reads as follows. So you don't get to see this summary at the ballot booth. Okay, all you got to see was that question. But the summary, once you look it up, is that provides the right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife as a valued part of Indiana's heritage and shall be forever preserved for the public good. Provides that the people have a right, which includes the right to use traditional methods, to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife, subject only to the laws prescribed by the General Assembly and rules prescribed by virtue of the authority of the General Assembly. Okay, so yeah, I guess it kind of leads on the exact same thing that I just said. So yeah, to promote wildlife conservation and management, to preserve the future of hunting and fishing. But then it goes on, okay, it describes a little bit more. Provides that hunting and fishing are the preferred means of managing and controlling wildlife. Provides that this constitutional amendment does not limit the application of any laws relating to trespass or property rights. This proposed amendment has been agreed to by the General Assembly. Okay, so let me just emphasize that for a sec. Really, the only difference between the public question and the summary that I just listed off was that last part. Provides that hunting and fishing are the preferred means of managing and controlling wildlife. Preferred means. Which means that when given an option between hunting, fishing, and every other option of managing wildlife, hunting and fishing will always come first. It basically kicks out every other option from the equation, provided that hunting and fishing are permitted in that area. So, kind of interesting once you start reading that, right? And so let me just read to you what actually changes, or what the Section 39 will actually look like in the end. So once this amendment passes, Section 39 will be added to the amendments of the Constitution and say that the right to hunt, fish, and harvest wildlife is a valued part of Indiana's heritage and shall be forever preserved for the public good. And then it goes on to list all the other standard stuff that I just mentioned. Okay. But then, that's when it has that, once again, hunting and fishing shall be a preferred means of managing and controlling wildlife. But then they clarify in this one that they actually, let me just go ahead and read it. This section shall not be construed to limit the application of any provision of law relating to trespass or property rights. Basically saying that, your right to hunt and fish is preserved, but so long as you don't break any other laws. So, basically. That's what that last little bit says. But everything else reads exactly the same as we just saw it. So, whether we're talking about the summary or the actual amendment itself, those are the same. Basically one and the same. The only thing that was different was the public question. And notice how the public question didn't say anything about hunting and fishing becoming preferred means of managing wildlife. Very misleading, very shady of politicians to do that. The more I learn about this state and its politicians, the more shamed I become. Because that is dirty, really dirty. Because what that's saying is that any other alternative method, such as herding animals, right? Sometimes people would see that there's a large collection of deer in a particular woods that's right next to a school. Well, we can't exactly hunt there. And so what they'll do is they'll go in and they'll basically run out those deer from the woods into a nearby hunting preserve or nature area or wherever. Someplace where they can be managed using hunting. Herding would no longer be permitted in cases where hunting was already permitted. So, sure, it would still be used in this case where we're right next to a school, but what if we're not right next to a school? What if we're just talking about random woods out in the middle of nowhere? That's public land. Well, we couldn't herd those deer off of that woodland. We would have to go in there and hunt them to kill them. So if they were of such abundantly high numbers that they were destroying the woods itself, the forest, we wouldn't be permitted to use any other methods other than going in there and shooting and killing the deer. That's unfortunate. That means that we're also not trying to encourage, maybe not so much here in Indiana right now, but we are trying to bring back the cougar and maybe even eventually wolves to Indiana. Okay. That would be kind of nice to have those top predators to help manage those deer populations. But those wouldn't even be considered under this new law. Hunting would be the preferred option. All other options drop away. So even when we consider things like other methods of population control, like going in and limiting the food source intentionally so that we can help the population die out and starve, or by going in and sterilizing certain members of the population so that they don't reproduce, or doing other surgical methods or drug-induced methods that may help limit population growth. We can't do any of that. None of that would be permitted. We'd basically be stepping back in time to a barbaric age where our only option of controlling wildlife was by shooting it. That's ridiculous to me. I can't even believe that that made it into the proposed amendments, and how it was permitted to be posed as a public question without clarifying that it would become the preferred means over any other means. That's outstanding to me. It really bothers me. So, needless to say, I voted against that because I believe that a mixed method approach is the most effective. Because we've seen that time and time again. Hunting and fishing are increasingly not an effective option by itself to manage wildlife. We've had damage to forests that have numbered in the millions of dollars just because deer populations explode out of control. And so we have to have these multiple reserve hunts, even here in Indiana, multiple reserve hunts seemingly every single year to control deer numbers. Because every year hunters are not taking enough deer. And every year we seem to have fewer and fewer hunters. So I don't know what hunters are going to do when there are fewer of them and they're taking fewer deer. I don't know how this amendment's going to help anything. If anything, it's going to exacerbate the problem by saying, hey, realize that there's only 100 of you this year as opposed to last year's 120, but you know what? You're going to be expected to kill even more deer than last year. Because now you're the only hope. The only hope that we have for managing deer populations. So go out there, break a leg, and have fun. That's ridiculous to me. But needless to say, it is on the ballot, so you can vote on that. If you think that hunting and fishing should be the sole option whenever it's available, you can vote on that. Anyway, part of this whole right to hunt and fish has been started by the NRA. Okay, and it's because they feel, many of them are conservatives, Republicans, that feel like their ability to own and use guns and hunt and fish is being infringed upon by a number of liberals and Democrats. So they're trying to propose these amendments in a number of different states to help preserve that in writing, to make sure that nobody takes away their guns or their right to hunt game animals. But nobody's doing that. So it almost feels like a forced last-ditch effort to make sure that nobody takes their guns away. Because nobody's trying to do that anyway. I don't understand the motivation behind that. It's very, very strange to me. But alas, there it is. On the rest of the ballot, you see a listing of, once you get past the proposed question, so to speak, or the public question, you see a list of about 15 to 20 candidates. And you get to select from those candidates, Democratic, Republican, or third party in some cases. And so you can sit there for a few minutes, making your selections, moving on to the next page. We weren't fortunate enough to have touch screens. We had buttons that we pushed on the sides of the tablet screen. But, the first option that you have there next to after the public question is whether or not you want to vote straight party. So you can just vote straight Democrat, straight Republican, straight Libertarian, and just call it a good day. You can push literally 2 buttons, one for the public question and one for the straight party, and go home. And you're done. The issue with that is that normally there's a little bit of glitchiness and inconsistency when it comes to cases on the ballot where you have to pick multiple candidates. So, like, if you're picking for certain things that require 3 different candidates, well, that may not necessarily go through if you pick a straight party ticket. Okay. Sometimes we see some glitchiness and some inconsistencies when it comes to some of these multiple choice type options, to where you have to pick 2 or pick 3 candidates from a listing. And typically there will be an even number of candidates in both parties when it comes to that position. So if it says pick 3, you'll typically have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats to choose from. But that's not always the case. It's just typically that's what the case is. But those sometimes don't work so well on the ballots when you pick the straight party tickets. So it may be a safer option to just go through and manually pick all of your different candidates, just plug them in, and then send it off at the end. Now, I didn't end up voting straight party ticket because I was aware of this particular glitch and problem, but also because I knew that there was one person in particular that I did not want to vote for. Like I said, my wife and I, we sat down a couple hours and we analyzed each one of these candidates that we knew were going to be on the ballot, and we ended up concluding, just based on their values, that we were voting for Democrats across the board. except for one case. Okay. And that one case came for the individual who was running as a part of the Democratic Party for U.S. Republican District 3. U.S. Representative, I'm sorry, not Republican, Representative of our District 3 here. And that was Tommy Schrader. Right? He was our Democratic Party choice, and after looking up his, I don't know, his views and his values, we decided that we didn't want to vote for somebody who was supporting Trump, actually, and who was not being backed by the Democratic Party at all. And when you look at him, you're just like, oh my gosh, he's like some random homeless guy. But then you start looking into his background, and you're like, wow, okay, he actually owns a real estate company in Columbia City. That's interesting. But he's run 5 times, actually. 2014, 2012, 2010, 2006, ran for the same position. So this 5th time, he finally made it at least to a level where he could be picked as a real representative. But he's run for the Democratic Party candidacy 5 times. It was on his 5th time that he finally made it. So, only if I'm so lucky when it comes to my Guam job, right? Needless to say, we didn't vote for him. We voted actually for the Libertarian candidate, Pepper Snyder, because Jim Banks was the Republican. And actually what he did was he was encouraging a lot of typical Republican values, and so I really didn't see any need to vote for him because he was a typical Republican. Okay, he had same views on pro-life and religious freedom and on Obamacare that I really don't care for. So he was very much a typical Republican in those regards, so I did not vote for him. But once again, it just comes down to, looking at your options and understanding what the various candidates do and whose side they're really on. Tommy Schrader was the Democratic Party candidate, but he was really a Republican. So I don't know how he even got that candidacy. It's very strange. So just look up look up the people that you're voting for, make an informed decision, and make a difference that aligns with your values. Okay, not trying to convince you of any of my values, just saying how I approached my situation and made decisions that were appropriate for me. So that's the problem with the straight party ticket. You could vote for somebody who has no idea what they're talking about or doesn't align with your values. So thank you so much for listening to me for the past hour on Based on Facts. My name is Chris Rex once again. If you're interested in finding any of our episodes, you can find them on YouTube and Facebook just by typing Based on Facts in the search bar. So thank you so much for joining me. Have a great one.